여러분 안녕하세요. 저는 오늘
Good morning. I am the MC of the PyeongChang Disability Forum Roundtable. MC, my name is Park Wee of the YouTube channel We Rockle. 7 years ago, I hurt my backbone due to an accident, and I became a person with disability. After this accident, I was able to see that the society does not have that much of a warm view or perspective towards persons with disabilities. And that is why I decided to launch my YouTube channel titled We Rockle. And today we are here at this roundtable discussion. The PyeongChang Disability Forum 2022 is being held to carry on the wave of change of awareness towards persons with disabilities that started with the successful hosting of the PyeongChang Winter Paralympic Games, and under the slogan of leaving no one behind and color with the Paralympic movement, to engage in discussions to create an inclusive society where the rights of persons with disabilities are upheld and persons with disabilities can live without discrimination and enjoy their rights. I do believe that through this forum, we will be able to discuss various policies and institutions concerning the persons with disabilities and also about the various efforts ongoing. However, I was really curious whether there has been true substantial changes in terms of the perceptions towards persons with disabilities among the rest of the population. So we invited experts in various fields here at the PyeongChang Disability Forum 2022 to talk about the able tech that connects the persons with disabilities with the rest of the population and look at the potential for spreading these technology throughout the society. Let me introduce the 4 panelists that we invited here today. First of all, for the past 15 years, he has been running a taxi and he learned about the special value of mobility. And so in order to resolve the issue of rights to mobility of persons with disabilities and the socially weak, he developed a 우리코 system, the mobility platform for persons with disabilities. Mr. Chun Jae-hyuk.
I've been working hard to develop a mobility platform to help with the right to mobility of the disabled. I'd like to share with you stories and the technologies developed to resolve the existing issues that we face with regards to disability. Thank you.
Next, he is a person who has been working for the rights to labor and mobility of persons with disabilities from a different perspective. He operates the 고요한 taxi, a taxi that is run by the hearing impaired, Mr. Song Min-pyo, CEO of Cactus. Hello, I am operating Co-Actus. I'm the CEO, and we are known better as the 고요한 taxi. It's a taxi service where the drivers are those who have hearing disabilities. We continue to develop technologies to ensure that there are employment opportunities for those with hearing disabilities. Thank you.
Next is someone who has been working hard for social participation improvement and communication improvement for those with hearing disability. And so he has been promoting a text translation service in our society through universal design. He is founder and CEO Park Won-jin of the AUD Social Cooperative. Hello, it's nice to meet you today. We are providing text translation service for those with hearing disability at AUD Social Cooperative, and I'm Park Won-jin. So I will be sharing with you this text translation service for the hearing disabled through my presentation. Thank you.
Last but not least, he has been participating in the various federations, associations for persons with disabilities, contributing to the improvement of services and various support related to the right to mobility of persons with disabilities. He is chairman Im Jo-sung of the Gangwon Urban Disability Association. Yes, thank you very much. I am the chairman of the Gangwon Urban Disability Association. I also run a living support center and Transport Support Center here in Gangwon-do, which I will introduce later on. Thank you very much.
At this roundtable, we will be hearing about the able tech or services that each representative is offering, and also talk about future improvements. And then we will have an overall Q&A session after the 4 presentations. So without further ado, let us begin our roundtable in earnest with our 4 panelists. First, from Woo Recall System, we have CEO Jeon Jae-hyuk, who will be presenting on the technology to resolve the right to mobility issues. As I mentioned earlier, I am Jeon Jae-hyuk, CEO of the Woo Recall System, and we are dealing with the issue of universal right to mobility. First of all, I'd like to thank Governor Choi Mun-soon of Gangwon Province for hosting this PyeongChang Disability Forum, and also thank you to the PyeongChang 2018 Legacy Foundation and all supporting organizations for your support. And I will not be talking about the technology perspective, but more talk about technology from the perspective of the disabled people. And technological development has brought on technology development for or to assist the people with disabilities as well. So after World War II, for example, the wheelchair for the severely disabled was first developed, and the wheelchairs that you find today were developed accordingly. And during the Second Industrial Revolution, more technologies developed, and in the next phase or the post-industrial era, there will continue to be technology development. And there was a demo for a self-driving wheelchair in Japan a few years ago. So technology development has allowed us to ensure the linkage between the different issues that the disabled face. And some have been positive, but then other times there are cases where other technologies were stolen or copied without any developmental effort put in place. And so there was lack of the connection between the effort to develop technologies and the issues. And so this resulted in the so-called bad technologies in our society, which were not helpful for the disabled. The assistive technologies, the fintech, the able technologies, that were developed to assist with the daily lives of the disabled. And ComTech technologies are also being used to try to help those with disabilities. The technology for the disabled include navigation, camera, image sensing and assessment, robots, wearable gloves have already been developed. And so if these technologies become more universal, they will be very helpful in resolving many issues related to the right to mobility. So AI-based machine technologies, autonomous driving technologies, humanoid robot technologies are being supported by the government as through policies. For example, Autobox was a company that developed prosthetics for soldiers who were injured in war. The microprocessor C Lab, a company in cooperation with Pentagon, are developing more advanced prosthetics, and the chips can be used to do actual simulation work with the patients. These microprocessors reads the intentions of the wearer to ensure that the wearer doesn't easily fall. So when they are using their smartphones, tying their shoestrings, these kinds of activities will also be possible in the future. In the 1988 Seoul Paralympics, four technicians provided free repair service. And at the Rio Paralympics, there were about 100 technicians who also participated in these volunteer work. And so this is part of the social repayment activities that we are engaging in. And in 2017, there was a presidential Fourth Industrial Revolution Committee that was established, which also dealt with various researches and consortium forming with the private sector to provide immobility services and assistance to the disabled. And within 5 years, there will be a pilot project that will take place. But Seoul City is saying that we cannot resolve all issues with regards to right to mobility through the use of vehicles alone. So the Secretary General of the Korea Disabled Federation has said that we need to have this innovation mindset as we approach this issue of the right to mobility. And particularly this will require long-term preparation and effort. And so there are related concerns as a result. Platform businesses, platform mediation businesses, platform operation businesses, and other policies are being utilized to provide call taxis, voucher taxi services to the disabled for dispatch, for reservation, for calling, for notification, for payment. Different types of technology services are being provided. However, as of now, do you think that the right to mobility of the disabled has been resolved? If it's not resolved, then what are the causes? So what Woody Call system did was to develop two different services. So SOS, care, medical mobility service, and anything call mediation service was, this business was developed to look into the reasons why we still face many problems with regards to right to mobility. And so I'd like to share with you our company's experience and the insights that we've gained. For the SOS Care Free Mobility Service, this targets the senior disabled members of our society. This is a volunteer taxi service. From 2020 January, from January 2020, we have sent out proposals to 16 cities across the country. So we have 25 in Seoul, in Goyang, and in one district in PyeongChang, North PyeongChang province, that was in Ponghwa. So we visited these sites to present the proposal and we had meetings. But not a single local government was interested in cooperating with us. So after this failed experience, we tried to select the UV PET mobility service. And after we reported this to the local government, we began the service. And we were able to identify the difference and the different issues that remain through this early experience. The technology that we provide is easy payment, automated location service, automated dispatch, and appointments up to 1 year and ex post assessment and customized requests from the user. So we provide these kinds of very specific services that our users require. So let's look at the chart. And for the analysis, we looked into the opinion from the local government, also from the disability groups, the disabled themselves, the taxi companies, the legal system, welfare system assessment, platform assessment, and the technology assessment. And also the assessment included innovation cost, the usage, and the issue solution possibilities. And so the disability projects that were receiving some support from the local government versus the pet service, which did not receive any assistance from the local government, the two showed very different results. So if you look at the level of awareness, for example, the disability awareness level was 10% lower than that of the pet-related project people. And so these were the results. As for the will to resolve these issues, I think the results were even more alarming. And we were concerned about the possibility that our approach overall was wrong. So when asked about the usability of this mobility platform, only 30% said that they will be willing to use this platform. And so when there is platform evaluation, we have to include both internal and external factors and criteria in the assessment. And another issue to consider is that why is it that the issue of the right to mobility of the disabled has not been resolved yet despite all these efforts? So the resolution rate is at about 50%. So the local government policy on the mobility rights of the disabled so far seems to be an overall failure because even the people who are in charge were skeptical about the effectiveness of the policies. And the innovation index, as you can see on the screen, is only at about 50%. And so down the road on the efforts to resolve the right to mobility of the disabled, there's still a high level of skepticism, it seems. So after we confirmed the results of this assessment, we were able to draw one conclusion, which is that the SMEs and the social enterprises, they are trying to develop various platform mobility services, but there is low level of trust in society on these services. That's why it has very poor success rate. And aside from these different indicators, we also looked into other factors, and the conclusion was, first, on the right to mobility, the legislation and the ordinances are almost non-existent. And among the different welfare departments, there was silo. And thirdly, within the local government, the vested rights of the existing companies was preferred and favored more by the local government, which blocked the entry of newcomers into this area. And fourthly, the local welfare system was again focused only in the existing businesses. They didn't have enough room to allow new attempts and new projects to take place. And another reason was that the new welfare services to be provided by the local government, there was not much commitment from the local government on providing new services. And so these were major stumbling blocks. And sixth and last issue is that the welfare services that were not included in that specific year there is no channel of assistance available. There is almost no channel of support provided, particularly to the disability groups. And so these were the stumbling blocks to promoting the right of mobility of the disabled. And of course, other problems and issues still exist as well. We worked hard to resolve the issue of the mobility, but then we were able to identify some issues that should be resolved through social technology, such as the issue of aging and the single household disability members, and the issue of mobility between or among the different local areas were some of the existing major problems when it comes to the right to mobility. But the social and economic technology to resolve these issues are not being developed or are being delayed in terms of development. And so the right to mobility for the disabled, will we be able to address this problem once and for all? We introduced the auto service as our contribution to try to solve this problem. Online, offline, daily mobility services are being provided through a single system. So that was the direction of our development. And another issue was that in the fourth industrial revolution era, we have to ensure that the disabled are not left behind. So the online, offline nexus technologies have to be developed further. After assessing these two projects, we were able to draw the conclusion that to resolve the right to mobility issues, we need to develop the technology and at the same time have some introspection time for those people involved in these issues. There are necessary conditions that have to be met. First of all, we need to have creative, innovative technology, and these technologies are being developed as we speak. Secondly, we need to have technology to resolve social problems. So, for example, 1 centimeter raised spots or curbs. These can be resolved through technology development. And thirdly, we need to have innovative thinking. All of the people involved may not be able to be all innovative people, but at least the decision makers should be people with innovative mindset. So these three necessary conditions have to be met, and when we do meet these conditions, the right to mobility for the disabled will be resolved, and I'm confident of that. Anything and the pet call taxi service providers are collaborating, and so what we are doing right now is to establish a system to provide support to the pets that were neglected. So Cheong-gwan, who is a famous monk who cooks Korean traditional food, is someone who did not study culinary arts but has a very innovative mindset. She uses seasonal ingredients and have been developing her own style of cooking. And so she's actually popular more overseas than here in Korea. And it's true not just for the monk Cheong-gwan, but the global chefs also, they have their own innovation values which they pursued, which led to great success. Looking at the example of the monk Cheong-gwan, I think it's a good opportunity for us to think about what we should do to improve the right to mobility for the disabled. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much. That was CEO Chun Jae-hyuk with the excellent presentation. As a disabled person myself who is on a wheelchair, in fact, the right to mobility is something that I've been thinking a lot about. So we heard that we need technology development and social interest to enhance to resolve these issues. So thank you very much for that very insightful presentation. I'm sure you have many questions, but would like to listen to the other panelists first before going on to the Q&A session.
Next, I would like to invite CEO Song Min-pyo of Coactus, and he will be talking about the 고요한 taxi platform and about the right to labor of the hearing impaired. Yes, hi, I am Song Min-pyo, and today I would like to talk about two broad issues. First of all, I would like to talk about you mentioned about 고요한 taxi, and it's about the jobs for the persons with disabilities. And second, I think Mr. Chun talked about this as well, but it's about the right to mobility of persons with disabilities. And these are very broad issues. These are very difficult issues to resolve. At the private sector, how are we approaching these issues? How are we trying to resolve these issues? I would like to give an example of our company to talk about how we are dealing with these two broad issues. First of all, among the various issues surrounding the persons with disabilities, there are some of the issues that are dealt through the public sector by the government. And then I think that there are issues that the private sector is dealing with through very innovative attempts. One of them would be the jobs for persons with disabilities. As you know, the topic of jobs and employment for persons with disabilities is an issue not only for persons with disabilities themselves, but also for the overall society, because employment is a very serious issue. I do not have to give you the statistics because you already know probably the serious situation. And what is most serious about the employment situation is that the persons with disabilities, when they try to find employment with the large corporations, for example, and the job market, because of their disabilities, the persons with disabilities are excluded because of their disabilities. And whenever they try to select their occupation, they have limited choice. So these are the obstacles and the challenges that persons with disabilities are faced with. Especially, we focused on the challenges that the persons with hearing disabilities are faced with. So we wanted to offer employment opportunities to these people as taxi drivers. This was the first time that such an attempt was made here in Korea. I think that in the US, through Uber or Lyft, there were these mobility platforms where already persons with disabilities utilize the gig economy to find employment. There are a lot of persons with disabilities who are already working in the gig economy. For example, if you have a car, you can use your vehicle to work. And using platforms, disabled persons were able to make profit by taking passengers from one place to another. But in Korea, as you know, the Uber service, because of many issues, have been prohibited by law. And because of that, in Korea, job creation through these types of platforms was difficult. But in 2018, we launched the 고요한 taxi service. At that time in Korea, 65% of the taxi passengers called taxis on the street. There were no taxi calling apps widely used at that time. But there was this demand for a more convenient service to call taxis. For the hearing impaired, there was this issue of communication. So what we did was we developed a software to deal with this issue. we wanted a system to help the communication between the drivers and the passengers. So through the sound recognition or through text or keyboard typing, we would enable the passengers to communicate and deliver their message to the drivers. And the drivers would have the preset buttons that they can use to communicate with the passengers easily. Of course, in immediate emergency situations, there are more simple ways to communicate with the passengers. Within a taxi, you don't have to really communicate a lot in a complex manner. And so there is a structured format of communication that can be used within taxis. So we developed the system to enable the hearing impaired to work as drivers here in Korea, as taxi drivers. But because of the law, the passenger transportation law, we could not directly operate a transportation business. So what we did was we found employment at a taxi company, and we would utilize the Korea Disability Employment Corporation. And through that corporation, we would actually supply the communication gadgets. But there were some limitations to this because, for example, there was about 180,000 won that we would have to submit to that company, and then from that company, a certain amount would be paid to the drivers. So that was the structure that we had, but this was a difficult structure that we had to maintain in the long term. We needed to improve the system or the structure that we had. And we wanted to improve the employment situation, but we thought that perhaps this was not the right way to go. At that time, however, the regulation sandbox was implemented and the Passenger Act was amended. So the platform transportation business was amended a bit. And so through applications, taxis could be serviced and people could call taxis. So we started the Goyohan taxi under the name of Goyohan M platform. I told you about the previous structure that we had, but we were able to improve that, and now we can ensure and secure a monthly wage of 2.4 million won per driver. So the drivers have a monthly wage that they can secure each month, and so it's a more stable income that each driver takes home. And we are registered as a workplace, a standard workplace for the disabled. At present, 107 persons with hearing disabilities are registered as workers of taxi companies, not only our company, but as workers of taxi companies. What do we fundamentally want to achieve through our efforts? The value that we want to create through our brand is that we want to provide service through the collaboration between persons with disabilities and those without disabilities. So we want the joint efforts made, and by doing that, we want to improve the employment issue of persons with disabilities in a gradual manner. I think that by making this step-by-step effort, we can improve the situation. We are in the mobility industry, and as we are in this industry, we're able to identify another challenge that the persons with disabilities are faced with. As it was mentioned by Mr. Jun, there is an issue concerning the right to mobility of the persons with disabilities. I think that there are different methods of transportation that the persons with disabilities can enjoy compared to the rest of the population. And there are some inconveniences that the persons with disabilities experience because the call taxis for the persons of disabilities are the main means of transportation that are used. I'm sure that all of you probably know well that there are some limitations in terms of using these services. For example, there are some challenges in terms of the dispatch of the taxis, or you cannot use these taxis to go from one city to another city. So I think that, first of all, there has to be more supply of these types of taxis and special means of transportation provided to the persons with disabilities. But also, at the city level, I understand that there are limitations in doing so. So we thought about what can we do at the private sector? What is our role? The city government says that because the service is only used by the persons with disabilities, and because this requires a lot of expense and a lot of budget, it's very burdensome to greatly increase the number of taxis or the means of transportation provided to the persons with disabilities. But we do have to continue to provide and supply these means of transportation for the persons with disabilities, and that's why we need the platform to support this. Of course, we're in the private sector, so we do have to think about profitability. Then we should think about transportation means that not only the people with disabilities, but also those who do not have disabilities can enjoy as well. I'm sure that if you have visited the UK, you probably know about this. There's something called Black Cab, and there's this big black vehicle. It has a very large space within the cab, and it's known as a luxury cab, a luxury taxi. And one of the main features is that the wheelchair can actually be accommodated within the taxi because it's the size of a Carnival or a Starex. So it's a really large vehicle, and it's a type of vehicle that's widely used as the taxis for disabled people here in Korea. And the slope is located on the side of the vehicle. So this black cab will be implemented this month here in Korea. We plan to have it imported at Busan Port this month. What are we trying to do with the implementation of the black cab? This is something that not only people with disabilities, but also the rest of the population can enjoy. So I think that with this, those who use wheelchairs can move in a more safe manner, and they can use the lifts on the side of the vehicle, and they can enjoy mobility without being troubled by the many challenges that they had faced in the past. Of course, it's not like we are importing and supplying 100 units of these types of cabs, but we want to give it a try, and by doing so, we want to gradually try to tackle this issue. Of course, there are limitations. For example, we have to think about the cost. We are importing the black cab, and one vehicle costs more than 100 million won. So because the cab itself is so expensive, of course, the fee for using the taxi would be very expensive as well, quite relatively expensive as well. So we need the government support for this, the government subsidy. That's what we are telling the government. And we are calling for the local government ordinance to support this. Of course, this has not been approved yet, but I think that this is a matter that the government has to work on. We have not resolved this, but I think that this is the way to go. This is the direction that we have to take. So, if I may recap and summarize, I touched upon 2 points. First is about the work and employment, as well as the right to mobility of persons with disabilities. And what we are doing right now, well, just because we're employing and giving jobs to 30 people cannot solve all of our issues, but we're trying to make attempts. And when we're trying something new at the private sector, then I think that we can actually increase interest in employment of the persons with disabilities. And when we continue these attempts, then I think that we can create a society where it's more easier for persons with disabilities to find jobs, to get employed. And of course, we're only importing just a limited number of cabs, but if there is good response, then I think that we can continue this effort. And this could actually help improve the right to mobility of the persons with disabilities. And perhaps this can further strengthen the platform business that we're engaging in and this platform industry. So we do hope that the direction that we are taking can further expand and help create a better society. So this concludes my initial remarks. Thank you very much. Yes, thank you very much. I would like to thank Mr. Song Min-pyo, CEO of Co-Actus. As you mentioned, the employment issue and the right to mobility of persons with disabilities is not just an issue for only persons with disabilities, but actually also it's an issue of design, but it's something that we have to think from the perspective of universal design. And I really emphasize with what you said.
Next, from AUD Social Cooperative, we have CEO Park Won-jin, who will be presenting on the text translation service for the disabled, the hearing impaired. Good morning. I will be presenting on the text translation service for the deaf and the hard of hearing. I am Park Won-jin, CEO of the Social Cooperative AUD. So first, I'd like to talk about AUD. My name is Park Won-jin. So this is how we do it in sign language. I am very happy to be meeting so many people at this venue, and thank you very much for the invitation to this important forum. So I'd like to talk about 5 different things with you today. So you know the sign language service. So usually the sign language interpreter can be seen on the screen on the right bottom side. And in fact, the service was provided during the recent elections as well. And the sign language service is provided to the deaf who use Korean Sign Language as the first language or main language. So it's a interpretation service that changes Korean to Korean Sign Language. On the other hand, the text translation service is an interpretation service by changing voice language to text language to the deaf who use Korean as the first language. So as you can see, this is the text translation service that we are utilizing through the screen that you can see in front, and I'm using the notebook screen also to use this service. Some of you may be familiar, others may be the first time for you to hear about text translation. And rather than text translation, many of you might be more familiar with stenography. So where did this term text translation or text interpretation come from? There is an ad that we come across in our daily lives quite often. It is Anti-Discrimination Against and Remedies for Persons with Disabilities. On Article 14, it talks about text translation and stenography. Article 21 talks about the text interpreters. The text interpreters and text translations are not new terms. They existed from 2008, but still many people are unfamiliar with them. It is stipulated in law, but in the field, stenography or stenographers are the concepts or terms used more. And even in universities where disability student support centers are operated, stenography, educational stenographers are the more popular terms. So we're not saying that we need to switch the term from stenography to text translation. But I think it's important for us to understand what text translation service is, which is as much necessary as sign language translation for those with hearing disabilities to have the proper policies in place. So I believe that the establishment of AUD Social Cooperative in 2014 was a major turning point. Prior to our establishment, there were three major stumbling blocks. The first is that we did not have a text translation support system in place, such as the one we have with regards to sign language. Secondly, because there is no system, it was difficult to access or find the text interpreters. And even if there were text interpreters available, it came at a high cost. So the hearing impaired had a difficulty accessing the service for their events. To resolve this problem, many people came together, the deaf and the text interpreters and the supporters and the staff all came together to establish the AUD Social Cooperative, and we now have easier access and more provision of communication service to those with hearing disabilities through text translation. In the interest of time, I will be sharing with you the example of the U.S. Massachusetts state. And the U.S. has a federal system, and so each state government has their sites, and through their websites, they offer information about support for those with hearing disability. In the U.S., this text translation is called CART, and I'm not talking about the shopping carts that you find in the supermarkets. CART stands for Communication Access Real-Time Translation. So what this means is that the CART service is a translation service or an interpretation service to promote communication accessibility. And the CART service is one in which the spoken language is translated or interpreted into visual text display or text language. So the CART service is one of the communication access tools for the deaf or those with hearing disabilities who read English fluently. And the subject of the support, depending on whether they are those with hearing disability or not, can be differentiated into CART or stenography. The stenography traditionally was used to have records produced after meetings. And in the US, the text translator license and the stenographer license systems are different. On the other hand, in Korea, we do not have a policy system in place on this issue. And so at our cooperative, we are providing education and selecting the stenographers with stenography licenses in Korea to provide them with training and education on the issue of those with hearing disability, and we give them membership to our cooperative after they go through this process. The next slide talks about who are the users of the text translation service. As is mentioned here, the deaf or those with hearing impairment who use Korean as their first language can avail of the service, or the deaf who use Korean as a second language also can be included. And additionally, those with special visual needs or those who need the big text and This is a service that has universal design, which means that anyone, regardless of whether they are disabled or able, can avail of the service. And when I give this explanation, I'm often asked, are the text translators interpreters? And an interpreter would change from one language to another, or one country's language to another country's language. And also the sign language interpreters change Korean to Korean Sign Language. On the other hand, the text translators change voice Korean to text Korean. So although they do not shift languages, the text translators change voice to visual Korean. And although there are differences, the commonality between the text translators and the sign language translators is that they offer communication supported to those with hearing disability. And this shows you how the text translation services are being provided during seminars or at events, forums. If there is a separate screen or monitor or a smartphone, this service can be provided. AUD has developed an app called Share Typing, and this is used to provide text translation using devices. Because of COVID, many events are becoming online events, and AUD also, as a response to the COVID situation, is providing text translation support online. During Zoom meetings or on the bottom of the YouTube screen, you can see real-time captions. And I will be giving 3 proposals before I conclude. First, we hope that this individual text translation service will be expanded nationally. Only Seoul provides free service as of now, and so for the remaining regions, individuals do not receive a free service support. Secondly, we are hoping for expansion of communication support in the schools. According to the Special Education Act, it is stipulated that students with hearing impairment should be receiving this support. But for the teachers and the parents and the students, they know the law exists, but oftentimes do not know how to access these text translation service. And the students with hearing impairment who have to go to school without such support there are many in number, and so we need to continuous advocacy and support for them. Also, the elementary, middle, and high school students prefer remote support rather than the text translators coming on site. And so we need to expand remote text translation infrastructure. Lastly, we look forward to enhancing voice recognition accuracy on smartphones, because there are times and places where we cannot call on the text translators. For example, at night, if you have to go to the emergency room suddenly, you cannot find a text translator. So a Korean voice recognition service that can be used for these emergencies has to be developed. Text translation service hopefully will be expanded further in the future. So with this, I'd like to conclude my presentation on AUD Cooperative. If you are interested, if you want to have receive more information, please just search us on search engines. And aside from text translation service, you'll find that there are different other types of services that we can provide you with. So thank you very much for your attention once again. Thank you very much to Park Won-jin for the excellent presentation. In fact, as I take on the role of the moderator in this session, I was wondering how I should be communicating with Park Won-jin, who is someone with hearing disability. So after listening to the presentation, I understand now the different tools that we can utilize. So I really look forward to the expansion of this service nationally.
Next, I would like to invite Chairman Im Jo-sung of the Gangwon Urban Disability Association. He will be talking about the future growth engine to ensure the right to mobility of persons with disabilities. Yes, thank you for waiting. I was listening to all of the presentations and I was able to learn a lot. I received a lot of good impressions, and I would like to take this opportunity to thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity to speak here today. I would like to talk about the Mobility Support Center for the Disabled. Currently, I would like to, let's take a look at the current status of the right to mobility of the persons with disabilities, and it is based on the current situation here in Gangwon-do, and the applicable laws and regulations refer to the Seoul Metropolitan Government Ordinance on the Mobility Support Center for the Disabled. So the Seoul Metropolitan Government has an ordinance on the Mobility Support Center for the Disabled. Unfortunately, Gangwon Province does not have such an ordinance. Gangwon Province says that you need to have a Protection Act in order to have an ordinance. Seoul City does not have a Protection Act, but how does it have an ordinance? It's just something I cannot understand. Anyhow, if you look at the purpose for operating and the definition of the Mobility Transportation Support Center for Persons with Disabilities, the Mobility Support Center for Persons with Disabilities operated to ensure the right to mobility of persons with disabilities and to provide social rehabilitation and various life services to persons with disabilities. It is operated by the Provincial Association and has 18 chapters, which runs the vehicle fleets. It provides transportation services to help persons with considerable disabilities to carry out their daily lives. It says considerable disabilities. To carry out their daily lives, commute to work, go outside, go to the hospital, go grocery shopping, raise civil complaints, and also to provide information support services, etc. So, the services for promoting the welfare of persons with disabilities is provided to ensure greater social opportunities to persons with disabilities and help them to establish themselves as members of society. That is a focal point of these types of mobility support centers. Then, who are eligible for the service? Those who are eligible for the service are, in accordance with Article 32 of the Act of Welfare of Persons with Disabilities, are persons with disabilities registered in Gangwon Province, and also in accordance with Articles 58 and 59-2 of the same Act, are also persons with disabilities under the provisions. Usage methods may vary by region. Now, let's take a look at the current status of the mobility support centers in Gangwon Province. How many workers are employed in the centers? There are a total of 19 mobility support centers. So a total of 74 people are working there. There are 32 drivers in total. Administrative workers are 23. There are 19 center heads. The number of vehicles are a total of 32 to 36. Why does it vary, 32 to 36? The 32 are the officially registered vehicles with the mobility support centers. The remaining 4 are the vehicles that has been supported from other organizations for the use at the mobility support centers. If you look at the number of usages per year, it's 73,535 as of the end of December of 2021. The number of usage per vehicle was found to be 2,042. Now, let's take a look at the future direction for further developing the mobility support centers. Now, as a person directly involved with the center and as a person operating the center, I have a lot to say. Now, first of all, there is the issue of the users aging. We need more concentrated attention and care for the elderly users. For example, the service is used by persons with disabilities who are going to hospitals, but under the current service, we only accompany them on the way to the hospital. And as soon as they arrive at the hospital, well, we can help them register. But from that point on, everything has to be done by the disabled persons themselves. And also, when they go to the banks, also we can only help them go to the bank. And from then on, all of the other administrative work or the work at the bank has to be taken care of by the disabled persons. Aside from that, the civil complaints at the community service centers, for example, or the public agencies, also it's the same thing. We can only take them to their venue. So in order to resolve this issue, we need a lot of budget. We need more human resources, inevitably. And I thought about how can we secure such budget and human resources. First, the human resources. Well, because of the amendment of the Act on Promotion of the Transportation Convenience of Mobility Disadvantaged Persons, we can see that there can be much change coming in the future. But at this moment, there is the Call Mobility Support Service Center for persons with disabilities. We need to operate this in a more efficient manner. At this moment, this service center is being operated by agencies or organizations that do not have a good understanding about persons with disabilities, in my view. So this makes the operation less efficient. I think that we have to fundamentally change this so that we can change the mobility services provided and make them more efficient. Perhaps we can provide more long-distance services as well. And by doing so, I think that we can provide improved services to the persons with disabilities. Also, I thought about some of the solutions to the challenges at hand. Now, since you gave me an opportunity to speak on stage, I thought about what I should think about. I also did a lot of study aside from my field of specialty. I looked into a lot of data, and of course, if there's a lot of budget, it would be great. We would be able to hire a lot of people, but that is not reality that we are in. So we have to think about how we can use the limited resources in an efficient manner. There are many different types of disabilities, and there are different types of organizations in accordance to the different types of disabilities. So I think that if these different organizations by the different types of disabilities come together, then we would be able to provide customized services. So if these different disability organizations are in charge of operating the call taxi services that are being provided, then we can provide very quality call taxi services to the different types of disabilities, or the different persons with disabilities in accordance to their types of disabilities in the most convenient manner and in the most efficient manner. So this would make mobility most efficient and stable. And we can also probably deal with the bottleneck that is being experienced at the Mobility Support Center as well. Now, the Persons with Disabilities Call Taxi Center is based on the venue or the target location that the people want to go to. It's a little different from the Mobility Support Center that is being operated in terms of the character. Next, I would like to talk about the budget. So, the different organizations, disability organizations, request for budget to the local government. Of course, there's a lot of organizations, and so that would be a burden for the local government. I understand that. That has been the situation up till now. How can we improve the situation? I thought about this and the way forward. I am also the head of a disability organization. And I think that we really have to work together. We have to be considerate of one another. We need to have patience. And we have to really make the effort for the welfare of all persons with disabilities. So let me explain. As a way to overcome this challenge, I think that the representatives of the different disability organizations should come together. They should hold meetings and set priorities in terms of the budget. And if we request for budgets in accordance to the priorities agreed upon, then I think much progress can be made. There are many different public officials. There are the director level, the director general level. There's the mayors, the governors, for example. And when we talk with them, they talk about the different programs that they have organized. And we participate in these programs. And in many cases, these are just one-time events. But when we talk with the working level officials, we can see that we can ensure the continuity of the budget that we secure. In other words, if we talk and work with the working level people, then we can work with something that can last. But sometimes there are conflicts of interest. There are different organizations, A, B, and C, and the working level officials, they know about these conflict of interests and that these organizations, they have clashing interests, and it's a very complicated structure. So if we coordinate our views, if we coordinate our priorities, then we can actually prevent such conflicts of interest and we can secure the budget in accordance to the priorities that we have agreed upon. And we can make this not just a one-time budget that we secure, but something that we can maintain on a long-term basis. So with this, I would like to conclude my remarks. Thank you very much for your attention. Yes, thank you very much. So we just heard from Chairman Im Jo-sung. Thank you very much. So we just heard from our four panelists, and now it is time to go into the Q&A. We have some questions that we have received in advance. It's time to begin the Q&A talk show. Is everyone ready?
My first question goes to CEO Chun Jae-hyuk. So you said that it's possible to resolve the mobility rights issue through the platform Urigo service. So what is the differentiating point between this service and the accessible transportation for mobility disadvantaged persons? service that is being offered. Yes, first of all, there is a difference in the item. So, on the one hand, there is provision of just the vehicle service, but for us, Urigo, we provide all of the personnel needed, all of the resources, as well as the vehicle. And also, our chairman mentioned this during his presentation, but there are people who cannot move around alone. So this Wurigo is an overarching or a comprehensive service that assists in the mobility of those who find it difficult to move around. And how or whether the disabled people are given the choice to select the kind of vehicles they would like to take is very important. There are some people who are more sensitive than others, and so it's in the case of the accessible transportation for mobility disadvantaged persons, it's impossible for them to choose the type of vehicle that they will take. On the other hand, through our Urigo service, it is possible to select the type of vehicle. Lastly, we connect to the systems of the local governments. So whether it's personnel or vehicle or life assistance, we have a system that allows for the overall management of the different types of services that are being provided. So I think those would be the biggest difference between the two. Another question, please. To resolve the issue of mobility rights for the disabled, there is a Seoul City and Disability Groups Consortium cooperating on an R&D project for autonomous taxis for the disabled. What is your opinion? I believe it's an excellent project to prepare for the next fourth industrial revolution era. I think these kinds of efforts will be very important. We're actually very appreciative of the fact that these technologies are being developed. Our proprietary technologies are being developed to utilize the autonomous vehicle trend that is going on right now. So of course, there are certain things that we need to consider. We have to be mindful of the care and the preparatory work that needs to go into the R&D. In other words, don't be too hasty in developing these technologies. So you have to consider why is it that the right to mobility issue of the disabled have not taken off in earnest. Another aspect to consider is the limitations to the accessible transportation for mobility disadvantaged persons. So why is it that this policy has not been developed fully? For companies that are interested in developing these technologies, I think they should be given more support and more incentives. And then we could use the data from the experience of these companies for analysis to ensure that autonomous taxi projects will be developed in accordance to the needs of the disabled and in a short span of time. I am quite confident that these kinds of assessment work will be very beneficial. Yes, thank you very much.
Next, I would like to give a question to Mr. Song Min-pyo. Now, when you were planning and operating the 고요한 taxi app, what was the first thing you considered in terms of access to information by the hearing impaired? Well, first of all, when we think about access to information, there are many different fields that we think of. But first of all, we think of web accessibility. And we first think about accessibility for the visually challenged. When we were developing the application, we considered the accessibility for those with hearing disabilities. And let me introduce some of them. First of all, in the case of the general taxi call systems, whenever the taxis are dispatched, we usually use sound signals. And what we did was we used visual signals on the screens to enable the drivers and the users to know that a call has come in or vibrations were used. And not only that, within the car, we utilize the ADAS system. And ADAS, it might be a new term for some, but for example, there are some alarms going off to ensure that cars do not clash. So it's a system to ensure that automobiles do not crash while in operation. When implementing such ADAS systems, according to the domestic law, there are two senses that has to be utilized. One would be the hearing sense, and the second would be the visual sense. So in your dashboard, you have to be able to see the alert. But in our vehicle, the ADAS system, because there's a lot of people with hearing disabilities, what we do is we utilize a different sense, which is the sense of touch. For example, the smartwatch. That is a type of approach that we utilized. And when we were developing the application, we also took in such considerations as well as we were developing the technology. Thank you very much. Let me give you a second question. Please share your view on the future tasks concerning the improvement of rights to mobility of persons with disabilities in the mobility industry. Well, able tech is a major theme of this session, but especially when it comes to the rights to mobility, I think what is most important or what's best is that, especially when it comes to passenger transportation, is to enable the use of taxis for door-to-door transportation. And when you're using taxis, in the case of Korea, as I mentioned before in my opening presentation, I think that there are different services provided to the persons with disabilities versus those who do not have disabilities. For example, there's a separate model for persons with disabilities, but I think that all models can be utilized by all members of societies. And that is the approach that we are increasingly going towards. So NATA and K5 are mainly used for taxis. And the manufacturers, automobile manufacturers, they have separate models for taxis. But when they do manufacture the models for taxis, I think that they should keep in mind that these taxi models should be models that can be used by all members of society, and that there should be no difference between the models for persons with disabilities or those who are not. So, of course, we still need the taxis, the call taxis for people with disabilities. But when we think about the rights to mobilities, we need this kind of approach and thinking in order to overcome the challenges concerning the rights to mobility. We also talk about the special means of transportation, but we need a more general means of transportation to be promoted. So I think that's the priority task for us, in my view. Yes, thank you very much. So next.
I'd like to ask the question to CEO Park Won-jin, who spoke about the communication services for those with hearing impairment. So the communication support provided to those with hearing disability was mostly about sign language services. So here at the PDF roundtable, we naturally introduced the text translation service. So I think this is a major shift in the sense that we respect diversity. In 2014, you began the AUD Social Cooperative, but before this text translation service began from AUD, what was the popular perception and what was the state of the policy support to the hearing impaired? Well, thank you very much for the question. As I mentioned earlier, by law, it is stated that through systems, the sign language service and the text translation service should be provided together to those with hearing impairment. But when I said that I would be beginning this business, many people were skeptical. So, as I mentioned earlier, the communication support for the hearing impaired has been mostly the sign language, and many people thought that it's just you just have to speak very loud and you have to just show your mouth to those with a disability. And when I was first starting my business and I said that I would be providing text translation, many people said that it's a waste of budget because we have sign language and it's a useless attempt. And also from 2008, we had the Anti-Discrimination Act established, and it is stated that text translation service should be provided. But in the public sphere, the service was not provided. And 6 years after the law was established, so in 2014, many people were still did not have access to the text translation and had difficulty in their education and job employment and others. And many people are saying that without AUD, it would have been impossible for them to actively participate in society. I will ask my second question. During your presentation, you said that you offer online text translation. In the COVID situation, I believe that it's actually an excellent idea to provide online translation. So, how did you come to prepare this service? When COVID-19 first began, there were a lot of events that were canceled because of social distancing, and AUD also was hit by the cancellation of our events. And as COVID became prolonged, many of the offline events had transitioned to online. And this was an immediate issue that we had to deal with because many of the events that were held online, also for them, without text translation supported to those with hearing impairment, they would be useless. And so, fortunately for us, even before COVID, AUD was already providing remote text translation in elementary, middle, and high schools. And based on this prior experience, we were able to transition very quickly from offline to offline services. If we did not have this experience of offering remote text translation in schools, we would have undergone a lot of trial and error. But very fortunately, because of the experience, were able to provide active support even during COVID. So we're very thankful for that experience.
Last but not least, I would like to ask a question to Chairman Im. Now, you talked about the future direction for the Mobility Support Center, and you also mentioned how the users continue to age and that the current service is limited to accompanying the users to their destination, for example, hospitals, and helping them register, and stops there. So in order to provide more focused care and concentrated care, what kind of services should be added? Yes, this is something which I regard to be quite unfortunate, because I myself, when I go to the hospital, I see that it's not just a registration. You have to, from that point on, go to the doctor, and then you have to consult with the doctor, and you have to take x-rays, for example, or you have to take care of additional tasks at the hospital. And as you know, the hospitals nowadays are very large in scale, and it's really difficult to navigate around the hospitals. There's a lot of paperwork that you have to take care of. So there's a lot of challenges for people with disabilities at the hospitals, especially the elderly. And the elderly, a lot of the elderly have illnesses, and it's difficult for them to take care of things on their own. So I think that we need a concentrated care service for these people. But the current system cannot provide that kind of service. So I think that Of course, during operation hours, we can do something. But if it's during the non-operating hours, we cannot do anything. I find that to be quite unfortunate. So when it comes to accompanying the users to the hospitals, I think that in-depth discussions have to take place so that we can secure additional human resources so that we can help the elderly users, because our population will continue to age. So we really need to come up with countermeasures in advance in a preemptive measure. Yes, thank you. So let's go to the second question. Now, the other panelists, they talked about the various able tech and also the right to mobility, and also the technology support these rights to technology and the rights to the daily lives of the people with disabilities. So what do you think is the most efficient and effective way to provide the technologies and services to the people with disabilities? Okay, so as a chairman of the Federation of Disabled Persons or Differently Abled Persons, let me speak on this and not just focus on the visually disabled persons. Actually, Mr. Won Dae-hyun or Ms. Lee Hyun-jung, I had sought advice from them because I was interested in this topic, especially for the hearing impaired. And Mr. Park Won-jin of the AUD Social Cooperative, thank you very much for your wonderful, wonderful program. You are providing a service that is immensely helpful. Now, this actually is something that probably the Association of the people with hearing disabilities probably will have to say. But I think that programs have to be developed distinguishing severe disabilities and mild disabilities. For example, those with mild disabilities will prefer text translation and sign language, but those with severe disabilities will probably prefer sign language. This is because those who are born with hearing disabilities, they would be more accustomed to sign language, for example. But for those who have actually received elementary school, middle school, and high school education and the formal education institutions, then they would prefer the text translation service, and they would know how to use the SMS and text services, so they would prefer that. And you gave us some examples. At this moment, the Gangwon-do Association of the Hearing Impaired, is operating a program for fostering the trainers and teachers. This is supported by the Ministry of Culture and Sports. And this is an online education course. But while coaching is being provided, it's difficult to actually write down what is being taught, and they want the word file. It's because the more professional wording is difficult to be expressed with sign language. And also the trainees, it's difficult for them to understand the more specific professional terminology. And that is why sign language and at the same time, written text is also both required. For those who are developing the policies, when you are developing such programs, please work with these organizations of persons with hearing disabilities so that people with mild disabilities and severe disabilities can both enjoy these services. Thank you very much. And also to the CEO of Co-Actus, Mr. Song Min-pyo. Thank you very much. I wanted to ask you a question separately, but maybe I can take this opportunity to ask you this question. Now, where are you operating your service? Mainly in Seoul and the Seoul area. Okay. So, I'm sorry, but when the hearing impaired are working as taxi drivers, they need a license. How do they get their driver's license? Well, according to the current law, they of course have to get their driver's license. That is a prerequisite. So they have to have a driver's license and also a qualification as a taxi driver. And there were some challenges to acquiring the qualification for taxi drivers because the Korea Transportation Corporation is in charge of the qualifications for taxi drivers. And it was difficult actually for those with hearing disabilities to take the test, but actually we raised a complaint to the Human Rights Commission through the Ministry of Justice. But still, not much improvement has been made in this area. The reason that I raise this question is because you have a very good system to improve the quality of life of the people with disabilities, especially those with the hearing disabilities, and also to create jobs for them. But this should not be limited to the Seoul area. I think that there are many people from different local municipalities. I do hope that your case can be introduced to the different local municipalities. It's a wonderful program. I hope that it can be introduced to the different regions throughout Korea. The mobility platform, 우리 call system. The CEO is Mr. Chun Jae-hyuk. I thank you also. So the call reservation system, your system, the mobility system, is it applied here in Gangwon Province? No, it is not.
Well, I don't have a direct experience of this service, but if it is available in Gangwon Province, so you don't have it in Chuncheon City also? Okay, I understand. And I wasn't really able to understand fully the presentation, so I don't have a specific question. But if this service will be expanded to other parts of the country, please understand that the situation in the different provinces and localities are very different. So please make sure to collaborate with the local disability federation or organizations before expanding the service. And in fact, there are a lot of different programs that are already available. So if you were planning to apply this service to Gangwon Province, I would have had a lot of questions for you. But anyhow, thank you very much. And this is the end of my discussion. Yes, thank you very much. We've had a very wonderful presentations and an exchange of ideas about different able texts and services that will allow the easing of the gap between the disabled and the able. And through this session, I was able to learn much. So today at this round table, we are wearing this transparent mask because the people with hearing disabilities, it's important for them to see our mouths when we speak, and we have ramps connecting to the stage. So I think these are small efforts to try to understand and respect the situation that the disabled people are in generally. I think we need this kinds of attitude and stance in the future as well. And I'd like to give a good chance for the closing remarks to our four panelists. Mr. Chun Jae-hyuk, do you want to go ahead first? the disabled people and the able people. The first step to connect the two would be, well, in our program also, we do provide an escort service where the able people assist the disabled people. However, what's more important is that there is a connection of the hearts and the minds between the two. So the able people always being considerate of the disabled, that is not what we are asking for. I think that has to happen vice versa. If we have that broad understanding, I'm very sure that we will have smooth communication between the two and among us. So we will continue to work towards this goal. Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Song Min-pyo. Yes, thank you very much for inviting this outstanding event. I thank the organizers and the host, and thank you, the participants, for joining us at this early hour. Thank you for your attention. Through this forum, well, of course, there are many challenges ahead, but through this forum, I do believe that in the field of able tech, because the private sector is making vast efforts, including our company, we will be able to make substantial progress and make improvements for the people with disabilities. We ask for your continued interest. Thank you very much. Yes, thank you.
Next is CEO Park Won-jin. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation to this forum. I think it's been a long time since I attended an event on site. Because of COVID, there are a lot of people with hearing impairments that continue to suffer, continue to experience a lot of hardships. And mostly it's because most people are wearing masks. We are not able to read the mouth shapes, and many people don't know sign language. So that's a kind of situation and environment that we continue to be in right now. However, in our society, I do believe that there are a lot of different efforts being put in place, a lot of different policies such as the sign language and text translation service policies being formulated and implemented. And so I believe that our society overall continues to develop. Thank you very much.
Last but not least, Chairman Im Jo-sung. I am participating here as a panelist, and I was able to learn a lot. There are the other three panelists on stage. We were able to learn that many different programs are being developed for people with disabilities. But all of the great services and the plans that have been mentioned here today, will they just end as rhetoric? I am a bit skeptic. I apologize, but let me just tell you frankly, all of these programs should be reflected at the local municipality level. They have to be implemented with the right and adequate budget. And if so, then even greater programs will be developed. If not, then I think that hosting this kind of a forum and developing great programs would become meaningless. So what I want to ask of everyone is that we have these great programs and these great ideas being developed and raised and shared. all of the municipalities, the mayors, the governors, please look into them. Please select them. Please support them with your budget for the benefit of the people with disabilities. I ask for your support. Thank you. Yes, thank you very much. So, in their relative fields, they are working hard to help and support the people with disabilities. I thank all four panelists. I do hope that this proved to be a meaningful event here at this round table. I do hope that we will live in an inclusive society where there is no distinguishment between people with disabilities and the rest of the population. I hope that we can live in that kind of a world. And with this, I would like to conclude the PyeongChang Disability Forum 2022 Roundtable. Thank you for joining us.